Hello, welcome back to what is now part 11 of how to create an endless runner using Unity and C#. In this part we're just going to be improving the gameplay a little bit and going over particle systems. But before we do any of that, we will just clean up our assets a little bit. We need to create a folder for our textures. And we'll also use this for our animations, and we'll just put all of that in there. I think that's all we really have to do before we get started, so we'll just get started with improving the gameplay. So if we play the game at the moment, the character is a little bit too floaty, he jumps a little bit too high, and the 3 blocks is just kind of pointless and not needed. So to fix that up, we're just going to come to our player and we're going to change a few of his values. So to make it so he's not as floaty, we'll make him just a little bit heavier so he falls in less of an arc, and then to make it so he can still jump somewhat high, we'll change this a little bit to compensate with his weight, and we'll just have a look at that. So now he can't get over them, and he can't get over that. That's another thing that we need to fix up. At the moment we're using square colliders for everything, but I think it would be a little bit better to use some round colliders. So instead we'll probably change all these over to round ones, to circles. Besides the ones where we have multiple points, they're going to need to use different ones, but to begin with, like I said, the 3 is a little bit pointless, so I'm going to delete the center one, and then now we have this instead where you have to jump through. So we'll just get rid of its box collider, and then we'll add circle colliders, and we'll just change their size. We'll make them a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller, and that should be fine. So it needs to be a trigger so that it works as a death point, and then we'll just do that to the other one down here. Make sure we have the right spread. Nope. Okay, so we'll come down to this one, remove its box collider, add this one, trigger, and change its size. And then hit apply. And so this is going to make it so that when our player is jumping over it, there aren't the corners sticking out, and it will make it a little bit more fair, and it will just work a little bit better with the jumping. So now we need to do that to all of these ones, and then once we get to this one we'll have to do something a little bit different, so I'll just do all of these and fast forward. Okay, cool. So now that we have all of them, we can come down to this one, where instead of having 2 circles, because we will have the problem again where if we go through both of them we'll lose 2 points of health. And then there's the other problem, which I'll just show you quickly. If we put the circle collider on the top one, there is no way to stretch it. We can choose its size and we can choose its position, but we can't stretch it. So to get around that, we're not going to use a circle collider. In these cases we're going to use a polygon collider, and we can just hit the edit collider, and if you come to a point and just hit delete, it will delete the point, and then we can just position this around it. And we want to get it somewhat close to what we had, how we had our circle ones, just so it feels the same and not weird. So then we make that trigger, hit apply, and now the game should be a little bit fairer. So if we press play, we have our smaller jump, we can make it over them, we can get through that. And then once we get to a double one, we can make it over them as well. So already that's feeling a lot better, but when we hit something, we lose health, but there's no like real visual sign that we've lost damage besides that our health gets minused. So that's how we're going to use our particle system. Every time we hit a point, like a spiky thing, we're just going to make the character bleed for a second. So to do that, we'll just get started with our particle system, with creating it, that is. Yeah, so to create a particle system, we just need to come into our hierarchy and hit create particle system, and then we have a particle system. So we'll just drag it down so that we can see it, and then we'll start changing some of the settings. So we don't want it to go for 5 seconds. If we turn off looping and come down here and hit stop and then simulate, we'll see that it will go for 5 seconds if we have this set to 5. So we'll change this to maybe a little bit over half a second, and then if we hit simulate, you'll see it only does that. But we want to have more than just that amount of blood, so if we come down to our emission, we can just change this to like 150, and then we see a whole heap of blood. Another thing is we obviously want it to be not looking like this. We want it to be red and square, seeing our game is pixel art. So we'll come down to the renderer, and instead of using the default particle, we'll change it over to the sprite, and then we get that. And if we come back up to the top, we can set its color to red. Which then gives us that. And then obviously they're way too big for the size of our game. So we'll just come to the size, and we'll give it a size of, we want to have this similar to the size of our pixels, so something like this should be pretty similar to our pixel size. And then currently you can see that it's being emitted in the shape of a cone, but we want it to be just in a sphere, so then it's going like this, right? Which will just look a bit better once we get to the end, because then it'll look like it's coming from our character a little bit more. So we still need to add some gravity. So the gravity in the game is just set to 1, so we'll just set this one to 1. We want it so that when the player is moving, the blood trails behind, so we need to inherit the velocity from the player. So we'll inherit half the velocity of the player, and we'll slow down the speed because it was going pretty fast, and then we'll have a look at that. So now you can see we have more of a blood effect, and I think that's looking pretty good. So the size of the sphere might be a little bit big. We can just grab its points and do that, and stop, simulate. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. So now that we have our, well, we have at least the beginning of our particle system, we still need to put some collisions on it. So if we come up to our game and put it over the floor, which has a collision, and we press simulate, nothing happens. So if we turn on the collisions and change it from plane to world, so it's just detecting everything, and do it again, you'll see it's still not working. And that's because the particle system physics is only 3D, it's not 2D. So to get around this, we just need to have a 3D object that will be on the ground and will be for the collision of the particle system. We don't need it to be on every single block, because then it's just a waste. So instead, we're just going to have it on our camera. Seeing our camera is set to follow our player, but it doesn't move up and down when the player does, it'll be perfect for making sure there's always a floor where the camera can see, so that we're in a if there's blood, the camera can see it, it can collide with the floor. So to get started with that, we'll just need to create a 3D object, which will be a plane, and then we'll just have a look at the size of it. Maybe make it a little bit bigger just to be safe, and then that's all we really need for that. We'll set its icon so that it's visible, and then we can go back into our particle system, go to our collision, set it back to collision, set it back to planes, and then give it a plane to be colliding with, which will be our plane. And now if we press play on this again, it will be colliding with the bottom. We want it to be a little bit different from that. If you have a look, it's colliding and then they're bouncing really, really high, and then they continue to bounce, which isn't what we want, seeing it's blood. So we'll change the bounce amount to 0.3, and if we press play on this, you'll see now that it just falls to the ground, but it just keeps sliding and sliding and sliding, which we don't want. So to stop that, we just add some dampen. So we'll do 0.3 on that as well, and then you'll see our blood just falls to the ground. The reason why it's glitching out a little bit is because if we come down to our renderer, we need to set the order in layer to in front of everything. So we'll go to 3, and then if we go simulate, yeah, we have some nice looking blood. And the reason why we did the inherent velocity up here is so that if we are moving this, it will move with it. It's not going to do it perfectly in this. We still need to change this to world space, I think. And then if we go simulate, yeah, now we can move this around and they will not be completely locked to this. They'll become their own objects in the world space. Cool. So now that we have our particle system set up, we need to make it a prefab, and the problem with making it a prefab is that to begin with we're going to lose this connection, because you can't have a connection through the inspector for an object in the scene on a prefab. So to get around that, we're going to do some coding, but we're going to need some coding anyway to make the plane follow the camera. So yeah, we'll get started with that, I guess. We can make the prefab, we can make the prefab of the particle system quickly, just so we have it here, and then we'll get into scripting. Seeing Visual Studio opened up in the camera controller script, we'll just start off in here, I guess. Seeing this is where we need to do our little bit of scripting to move the plane with the camera, because we're going to make the plane a child of the camera. But when we do that, seeing we have this bit of script that is moving the camera to a certain position, it's also doing it for all of its children, and we don't want it to do it for it. So we actually won't make it a child of the camera. Instead, it will be its own object, and it will just be moving based off this position as well. So to do that, we just need to copy this line and paste it underneath, and then we'll add a new variable up top, which is going to be a public game object, which is going to be our plane, and then we just want to add our plane down here, so that it's the plane that we're moving on this line, not whatever the script is on. So now that we have that, we want to keep this offset so that it's in line with the camera, seeing this is the line moving the camera, but we don't want it to be at the same height as the camera, seeing the camera is in the center of the screen, and obviously our floor isn't in the center of the screen, so we need to offset it on our up and down, and the offset amount we need is minus 1.47, I think, from memory. So the reason that wasn't working is we need to put F at the end just to say it's a float. And then if we come back into our game and press play, once it's loaded, wait, not press play, come over to our camera where we have that script, and where it says plane, we just drag our plane. So we will, just to demonstrate this quickly, make the particle system a child of the camera, which, see how what I said before, how it's because the camera script has a, because the script you made for the camera moves the position of the camera, any children also get moved. So when we moved the particle system to a child of the camera, it got moved to the camera's position. But that's fine for now, seeing it's just temporary. So we just press play. The plane should follow along at the right height. Yep, so it's flipped up to the right height. And if we press play, it follows along and our blood spills out onto it. Cool. So if we just want to have a look at that properly, we can press looping, do it again, just so we can have a look at what our blood looks like. And so that's our blood. Cool. So now that we have that, we still need to control when the blood is shown, and we're going to do that with some scripting. So back into Visual Studio and to our player script, and in here we're just going to need to add some new stuff into our def function. So to begin with, we need to add a new public variable, which will be another game object, and this will just be storing our particle system. So we'll just call it blood, and then if we come down here, I think we'll handle all of this in its own void, and we'll just call the void blood, all in capitals, because we can't use the same spelling as the variable we used before, because that's already used. And then up here, whenever we hit something, we'll just trigger this void, and to do that we just need to write blood with the brackets and end that line, and that way it will do this line, and then it will launch whatever's in here and do everything in here. So in here we need to do a few things. We need to instantiate our prefab, and the reason why we're doing it as a prefab is because we might hit something twice on the same screen, and we're going to want to have two instances of the blood on that screen. So if we have it as a prefab, we can spawn multiple instances that can be all treated as separate objects that we can delete at separate times, and it'll just make it look a lot nicer, and it'll just be easier. So to do that, we just need to instantiate our object, and then we need to make it a child of our player. We need to make it a child of our player just so that it follows our player's position and looks like the blood's coming from the player. So yeah, to do that, all we need to do is create a game object, which is going to be game object, child object, and this is just going to be where we instantiate our object. So instantiate instantiate our blood, not that blood, this blood, and we're going to be instantiating it as a game object, and that's it for that line, and that should be a capital. Cool. So all this says is we are making a new game object that's called child object, and it is our blood, which we have up here, which is going to be our particle system, and it is a game object. So we have that line, which will instantiate them, but we still need to make it so they will follow the player's position. So to do that, we just need to grab our child object and get its transform, and then we just want to set parent, and basically this will just allow us to set the parent of the object, and we want to set it to this dot transform and then comma false. If you don't have false, it won't be it won't actually keep the location of the player. It will only be spawned in the location of the player, but if you have false, it will follow the location of its parent. I think that's how it works, but yeah. So now that we have this, all this is saying is that our child object, which we created up here, get its transform and set it to as a child of, well, set its parent as this object, and this object is our player because we have this script on our player. So that's just going to make it so it follows it, and then all we need to do is add a destroy, because we don't want to just keep all of our bits of blood in the level and just populate the level with bits of blood. So we just need to destroy it, and we're destroying our child object, and we want to destroy it after it's been in the level for 2 seconds, which is just that. So now if we save that, come back over to our game, wait for it to load, and then come to our player, and then we can delete this particle system. Just hit apply before we delete it, which could be a problem because it just changed its scale to 0. So if we just quickly come down to our prefabs, change its scale back to 1, and then go back to our player. It's the one in the prefabs that we're going to want to link into our blood. We're not going to want to link the one that we had in our scene because that is only an instance of the prefab, and down here we have the actual prefab. So now that we have that, we will press play and see how that goes. So when we hit something, nothing is happening. So let's have a quick look into our script. Or did we not set it up properly quickly? Let's have a look. We have that in there. That's all we really have to do in here, so let's have a look in our script. Okay, sorry about that. So it's not a problem in our script. It was just a problem from when we made it a parent and it inherited some of the transform stuff. It set this to like -11 and this to like -1 something. So we just need to change all of them back to 0, and then it should work fine. So, well, there's still another little problem, but it fixes that problem. So if we just play and hit something, you'll see now it's working, but it isn't working properly. So let's have a quick look at our particle system, see what it does when we're not in the game, and it's working normally. It's not colliding with the ground, so obviously there's been a problem with that. So we'll delete that and have a look at our ground, and it is still there and it is still fine. So why is that not working? Let's have a quick look. Oh, it's probably to do with our collision. Yep. So when we come down to our collision, we still have it set to plane. Like I said, that's not going to work now that it's a prefab, so we need to set it back to world. And then if we drag it in, we have that working again. But I think we'll find that in the game we still have the little weird thing. So press play. And yeah, it's really, really big. So that could be a scale problem. Z doesn't really matter, but we'll change it anyway. And remember, that needs to be changed in the prefab. Cool. So, as you can see, it's still a little bit too big because some of it's happening under the plane. So we'll go even smaller. And see if this is too small, because this is pretty small. But no, that looks pretty good. Cool. So we have our improved jump and a little bit of improved level, and now we have our blood. So I think that will be it for this episode. We will go over the script quickly. Yeah, so all we added in here was we have our new variable, which is just our particle system, and it's called blood. And down here we are creating a new object, which is our blood, and we're instantiating it in the level, and we're setting its parent to whatever object this script is attached to, and then we're making it follow its local space. And then down here we just delete whichever object we have just created after 2 seconds. And yeah, that's what we add into here, and we just have it so we have the new void and it just gets triggered whenever we hit something. So yeah, and the only other thing we did was in the camera controller we added our plane, and it's being set off our player's position, just like our camera was, but unlike our camera, its up and down is also being offset, just so that it is equal to the height of the ground. And yeah, I think that's about it. But yeah, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.